2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3.
What I liked about Martin a lot is that he was a strong feminist.
If he needed help, Martin would find some way to help.
He gave very much of himself and his thoughts, increased our own thoughts, made us aware of so many things that other people just chose to ignore.
He wouldn't argue. He would just discuss, consider, look at things from every angle.
He was very generous and also frugal.
He was there. He wasn't daydreaming while you were talking to him. He was actually listening.
He taught a lot of people how to be engaged.
He had time for people, and he'd listen. He wouldn't just talk.
He was completely non-judgmental. He just took people as they were.
He was a good friend.
He was a man of great integrity, and I often felt that he certainly lived by his values throughout his life.
I believe I met him first at the UFO Club, Flying Saucer Club it was called then. It was in 1948.
I met Martin in 1988. I was working over here in Fall River in an electronics repair shop. And Martin and another person came in the door. They were proselytizing a socialist paper.
We were forming the Powell River Anti-Pollution Association, and there were quite a few meetings, and I kept seeing this tall man with a brown paper bag on his head. And I used to look at him and think, who is this guy?
I first met Martin around 1987. I started attending environmental meetings here, and immediately we became friends, and we were definitely kindred spirits.
I first met Martin in 1955 when I worked for the Comox Logging and Railway. Helgi Forsland was a good friend of mine, and him and Martin came down to get me to play a guitar with them.
My first major encounter with Martin, it was through the environmental movement.
I came to meet Martin, it was at, what do they call it, an Earth Day celebration? I think it was the very first Earth Day celebration that was taking place at the complex.
Trying to realize where I met him at first. It was with pollution concerns. Problems arose with the incineration that was being proposed.
When I first came to Powell River, he was quite a well-known person, so I would see articles in the paper, and I was interested in many of the areas that he was interested in, so I saw him at meetings and that sort of thing.
I first met Martin about 20 years ago. It was the beginning of Theatre Now.
I met Martin Rossander just over a year ago, April 21st. It was the Interfaith Fair that was going on in town, and went by the Unitarian booth and saw for the first time in person Martin Rossander. I was instantly taken by his eyes, just how alive, how almost translucent they were.
I was lucky enough to meet Martin when I first came to Powell River over 7 years ago now. And I kept hearing about this man, Martin Rossander, who had done so many different things in Powell River, and that somebody needed to help write his story. And I wasn't working at the time, so I met Martin and I offered to listen to his stories.
I have a little story about that.
Oh, good.
Martin had a tremendous variety of interests, and a lot of that came from his history. Engaging Martin in conversation about his own past was always interesting. The diversity of his experience was very significant.
He left home at the age of 14 and with incredible wisdom, because he was not having a good time at home. So instead of fighting or having hassles, he just decided to go. I'm pretty sure he was born with that innate wisdom.
You see, he came in from the Depression period and from great deprivation. So he put value on what was here, whereas we have grown up in a culture that is a throwaway culture, and that was deeply offensive to him.
My parents' home, or homestead, Prairie Homestead, pretty much isolated from, well, there were neighbors, but because of his seven-day beliefs, we neighbors were a little bit aloof about coming near, and he was aloof about letting too many other neighbor children near his children. So
That's your father?
My father. This pretty well cut off much of our connection with other children.
Life at home was pretty unbearable, and I was the smallest of the lot, lowest on the totem pole, so I took all the rough beatings. I did the work, and I had no recourse to complain, nobody to complain to.
In the community there were farm workers who were sort of migrant workers, and they would arrive by freight train or hitchhiking or whatever they did. They wouldn't have enough money to ride on the cushions or pay their fare. It was a lifestyle that they rode on the freights and came around and worked for a few days a farmer, or maybe a month or two or three for a farmer. They treated me with respect, and I was curious about them, and they talked, and so I learned a lot about the outside world from these migrant men who worked for a short period of time here, there, and somewhere else. By the time I was 14, I guess, I was very anxious to get out there into that world, but at the same time, things were becoming very, very intolerant at home.
So I packed up my violin in the dark of the night, a few bits of clothing, and quietly snuck out of the house.
And I walked 18 miles to the nearest railway station and met with the hobos, and whom I already knew their language, and they treated me as one of them, and wow, suddenly I'm not just a kid being bandied around, but I'm a man, I'm in a man's world. Wow, I'm liberated.
I was headed for Edmonton, and as soon as you get near the city, then you have all kinds of police and guards, and I certainly experienced that.
Tell us about it.
If you're convicted of stealing a ride on the train, that's stealing, that's theft, and that's 30 days in jail. And the jail in those days was prisoners were farmed out to the beet growers to just do labor in the fields. Suddenly were grabbed by 3 cops. One of the 3 that was with me, hobos I guess we were, suddenly took off, started to run. One of the cops after him. Then the other hobo took off in the other direction, one cop after him. Just one cop and me. He hears the race going on the other side of the train, and here it's coming closer, so he thinks, you stay right there. Well, of course, as soon as he was there, I climbed up on the top of the tank and got my violin and my pack off there and headed for downtown. It wasn't in Edmonton very long till I had a job on a threshing rig with a group of other teenage boys. They were all older than I, but I had greater experience and knowledge than they had, and in the process there I stopped a runaway team that wasn't the one I was in charge of, but I managed to stop the other fellows.
I just dropped everything I had. I kind of had to get in underneath the drive belt, which is a long, the tractor's sitting over here, the machine is here, and there's a long drive belt that's flopping around. Anyway, I got under that, and after this retreating back end of a hay rack. Now they're going so fast that I can't get a jump. I can't jump. The ground is going out from under me too fast. I managed to get a hold of the lines which were tied to the post at the front, and simply pull them line, steer them away from the buildings, and had a big circle out around and drove them right back into where they had been in the first place. Mr. Armour, so he was so pleased and so delighted that he just shut down everything. We're going to celebrate.
He had a real love of animals, He used to tell me stories about his dog and the team of horses that he had, and it would almost bring tears to his eyes when he was talking about these things. Deep, deep empathy for critters of all types.
When he was a young man, he right away in the ranches where he worked, they noticed what a connection he had to the horses. He could train the horses without using any kind of violence at all, and dogs, everything. And he treated people the same way.
Before I left home, we had about 18 or 20 horses. There were calves and cats and dogs as well in the picture. If I was sad at home because of the lack of communication with people, I'd crawl up in the loft and there'd be a batch of new kittens there. Well, we could just have a few hours there in complete respect with one another and trust, and those were good experiences. There was 2 colts came into being, and right from the time they're little fellows, I was making friends with them. And so now they're just like your brothers or your sisters. These 2 colts, we were riding them as soon as they were big enough to carry us, and we didn't need a halter or rope. It was all cooperation. It was just everybody having fun.
I was at his house one time and I noticed a little notice that he'd made and put on his notice board. It says, "Be kind to animals, don't eat them."
He would disappear, in the fall. And about the second time he came back, I said, "Where have you been?" He said, "Oh, I've been in the interior." So I said, "Oh, you've been tasting the wine?" He said, "No." So I said, "Well, where have you been? Have you got a secret girlfriend or something?" He said, "No." So I said, "Well, what have you been doing?" He finally told me. He said, "You can't tell anyone." So I said, "Oh, okay." Well, he said, "I've been watching them round up the wild horses in the interior." Oh, I said, "That would be fascinating." Well, he said it was even more interesting when we let them go. So I said, "Oh, really?" He said they'd wait till the horses were all rounded up. Then at night, he and this woman went out and opened the gates on the paddock or let them all go. And again, it was like, wild horses need to be wild, you don't lock them up and capture them. Later years, I thought, boy, that must have been pretty dangerous, because if he'd been caught, somebody might have caused him a lot of problems. But no, he went up year after year to release the wild horses, and that was again, typical Martin. That's what he did.
He thought wildlife should be protected because the planet needed wildlife to be balanced. And we were dismayed at the fact a lot of people didn't care about that.
Actually, right to the end, at the hospital, maybe a day before he passed, he told me that people are very cruel with animals and they don't really appreciate them. So he was always thinking about that.
For the Depression years, 1931 on, I crashed around through working in the farms, ranches, threshing rigs, road building, logging, and communicated with the people who were more or less marginalized from the system. Then you have the relief camps and the artificial creation of work, and how ridiculous and how stupid that was. Now you're supposed to work, just because the work ethic says you're getting your 20 cents a day, whatever it is, now you've got to work for it. But somebody's carrying a stone up the hill, somebody else is rolling it back down, somebody's digging a hole, somebody else is filling it. And that's so ridiculous. And we're still hung up on that. 50, 60, 70 years later, we're still hung up on that nonsense that you've got to have a job. And if you don't have a job, you don't deserve to eat. Or if you do, you're shamed into being a secondary citizen. It's absolute nonsense.
One of his biggest philosophies that he kept promoting was the idea of leisure instead of jobs, jobs, jobs. Because we get so trained and scared about having jobs, that he thought that if we spend more time in leisure, that the society would benefit a lot, and we would enjoy ourselves more too.
Most people's lifestyle, rushing around and, you know, these 9-to-5 jobs and always got to be somewhere at a certain time. Like, I mean, he was really into, we need time just to relax and enjoy life, enjoy nature, enjoy the simple things in life too.
We wish to simplify the means of life itself, food, clothing, shelter, entertainment, babysitting, whatever, so that we have time in our personal lives for that potential of human existence that has to do with meditating, with rest, with stand and stare, spirituality, family, community, freedom, relaxation, and find your own inner self. That is not being done today in its mad, crazy rush for more, and more, and always finding that we have less, and less.
When he used to mention the leisure idea to people, they would kind of look at, like, not really understand, like what do you mean leisure? Are we gonna just sit around? But it's actually not a bad idea for us to start sitting around and not causing damage. And working creatively, doing creative things together.
His concept of leisure time and of a better balance of work to life was also based on the fact that that he had been involved in the technocracy movement for a long time and comprehended that technology, in theory, should bring more leisure time, but that the financial paradigm had never been able to adjust to it, and so therefore people needed to be kept at work. Doing essentially useless things, creating things that were meant to be destroyed so that they could be created again. And that was always a difficulty for him, and so it should be a difficulty for us all.
The leisure time he saw as, you know, if we all pull together, we wouldn't all have to stress out so much, and we'd all have better lives.
Look at the knife's edge of security that our people are sitting on. At a time when we should be very, very secure, we are very, very insecure. And I'm saying we could have abundance, and we must adjust our social system to accommodate abundance. That'll be heaven on earth. What's wrong with it?
After 9/11, we all were totally freaked out, of course. And we thought, okay, what can we do? We decided we're gonna act locally, and finally we came out with Beyond Survival. Because it's not only survival that we want to go beyond that and survive in a different way, you know, survive in a creative way and on another level.
That's the message then that Beyond Survival would carry and like to promote on and on and on.
I think Martin was one of the few people who really understood what community radio could do.
None of us are experts at this sort of thing, but it is a voice that's coming from the community itself. It's something in our minds that is mystical about being on the air, on the radio.
The shows were not planned hardly at all. He all of a sudden would meet somebody and he would say, okay, do you want to be on the show? And that person would come, and it was more like a round the table conversation. Some of those shows were so awesome, they seemed to work really well together, that we both would go, oh my God, you know, like, didn't that just turn out like magic?
With the radio, he had a vision for that, which a lot of people, you know, it met their needs, it said something to them, and they were able to follow Martin into taking action on a lot of things. That went for quite a number of years.
You know, on this program, Beyond Survival, we used to try to convert people to our point of view. And I think more recently we've kind of agreed that instead of that, we'll just bring people who are working in towards transition from a waste, destructive society over to one of conservation and self-sufficient, working with nature rather than making nature pay for all our human mistakes.
Tune in, folks, and listen to your station.
He thought that playing music, singing, doing things together was so important for the community and the key to survival on many levels.
Oh, he played the violin, or it was a fiddle, I guess.
He taught himself to play the violin.
The first recital, I call it my first recital, was in a boxcar. The men were very, very depressed. I pulled the violin out of my bag and started to play Home on the Range. Come on, man, don't you know any bum songs? Oh, yes, I knew all the bum songs. So we got Hallelujah, I'm a Bum, and pretty soon they started singing a little bit.
Hallelujah, bum again. Hallelujah, give us a hand out to revive us again.
And the train speeded up and the clickety-clunk became a happy tune instead of just a drag. We could wave to the engineer way up front on the front end of the train, and people on the long side were waving. So we brought happiness to the Hobo Land for a few minutes anyway.
He loved getting people together to play music.
He had a liking for music, and he had a very fine violin, a very good violin. He could play a few good tunes on it, but he was best if somebody was in the background with an accordion or could carry the melody for him.
He was interested in entertainment, pure entertainment. As you know, they had a thing called the Enjoyment Band, and Martin was a performer. I have a picture that he gave me in a magazine that went back to 1935 when he was playing fiddle and playing the harmonica and some other instruments amongst the people that were in road construction on the border of Alberta. He was a natural born performer, and he believed in involving not just people who were really good at it, but just involving anybody and everybody that wanted to be a part of the entertainment.
Martin believed that people were better coming together as a group than having a solo performance, and he was a true socialist in that way. Celebrating humanness was a huge part of Martin's life. He would love any gathering where that was happening.
When my husband passed away, the Enjoyment Band played at my husband's memorial. It was made it a very pleasant event, music like that. He had compiled an instrument he called the Beast. It was a percussion system made up of all sorts of recyclable items and gongs, and I was supposed to play this beast.
It was just a good way to pass time, not to kill time. It was a good way to pass time.
And what's the difference?
We got a good, well, okay, to kill time, you're just doing something until something more interesting comes around. But in order to pass time and pass it happily, it was a get-together where everybody got along. You wouldn't know it by the different musicians that we had there, but we did.
He found out that a year before I retired, I was interested in the violin. Well, he said, I've got a violin here, and he went in his back room. It took him a while because it was a little crowded in there. But he dug out his violin, he brought it out, and he said, Paul, he said, why don't you just take this and use it for a year, and if you like it, then, you know, we'll look at to see if you really want it. And I did. It meant so much to me at the time, and he got to play fiddle with us. We got to play for his birthdays. He gave out and he got back, and then he gave out more.
The people I played with in later years, we didn't spend much time tuning up anyway. Never waste of time. We just get into it.
Often at the log cabin, while each of those people as an individual were good enough musicians together, I didn't know who to follow. It was pure torture for me.
Martin was the representative of the Unitarians here in Powell River, so he managed the log cabin and activities that went on there. The log cabin was a central focus of community, and many people in Powell River have spent time there.
Martin took it over as far as using it for environmental meetings, letting people stay that were transients.
It was a very unpretentious place, all made up of second-hand things that people had donated, very much from the community.
The place was packed with people. It was almost always packed with people on Saturday night. Usually many more people than should have been in there.
But everybody managed to get in there, and I had many meetings there, and many good parties, actually.
The floor was all uneven. You know, it was kind of rolling a bit and a little bit, you know. But it was so cozy and warm in there, and just, it was great. Those times were great.
So this is the key to the old log cabin. And it's handmade. Of course, Martin made it. There's a washer on this end, and a tapered piece of steel, and kind of a horseshoe at this end. And it was quite a simple lock. But if you didn't have the proper key, of course, you couldn't open the lock. So at some time, and I don't recall exactly what time it was, but I needed access to the hall fairly regularly, and Martin donated a key to me, so it was quite an honor to have a key to the hall.
Martin became part of the Theatre Now group, and we used to meet at the log cabin. We used to have a lot of fun just doing improv and stuff there every Friday night.
It blossomed from there because Martin was quite interested in theater and the power of theater, the power of the stage, the power that theater has to get messages across. So he was a great supporter in a whole variety of ways for the company.
Martin was a great supporter of community gatherings, and he encouraged us to involve other people. Always working and playing together was more important than being a solo act.
Yeah, he'd like to spread the happiness a little bit.
He brought the Unitarian Fellowship to Powell River.
We seldom had a Unitarian service. I don't think we ever did have a formal Unitarian service.
I never knew Martin to be a religious person, but there was something in him that was always looking in some ways to spirituality and how he connected with that.
Well, as I knew the Unitarians, they were interested in everything. They never claimed to believe in God or to not believe in God. They were just interested. He would not adopt a fixed attitude about anything. He might express opinions of what he thought at the time, but a week later, maybe he's changed his mind. He thought about it more and he got a different view.
He was not always in alignment with the Unitarian classical philosophy, I think. Occasionally someone would come from somewhere else, the city, and would wonder what kind of a Unitarian church this was.
What he wanted most of all is to open people's minds so people could explore ideas and search for the truth. Sometimes he said, as long as they're searching for truth, I like them, but once they find it, then it's kind of hard to relate.
He was an extremely interesting person to discuss with, because you could bring up anything you liked, but you should know that he's going to ask you to prove it, or ask you why, or why not. It wasn't just a matter of stating something. I like that about Martin.
He was in touch with a spirit that maybe is not in the same dimension that we see around us. And it enabled him to make connections and to see people in the light of that spirit. He was never mean, even though he might not agree with what forest companies were doing or oil companies were doing. He was never mean.
He understood that we are all one and believed that very, very deeply. And so it was important to take care of what is, what our world is.
I was reading a very interesting book called The Tibetan Book of the Living and Dead, and I told him about it, and we started discussing it, and he liked it so much that I bought him a copy. and we would sit around and talk. He was very interested in all aspects of living, and also he was very interested in what happens when you die.
I don't know how many people know that Martin had a son, Stanley. Martin was a single parent in the late 40s, early 50s. And Stanley only, unfortunately, lived until he was 12.
One day that I was in the van with Martin, I asked Martin if he was going to come on one of these picnics up Tyndon Lake, and he just said no. Tears were kind of welling up in his eyes, and he said, no, I can't go there. My son Stanley had drowned there as a boy. Oh my God, I said that. My brother was on that outing. 4 of them had gone off exploring around the lake, and they found a canoe, and 3 of them got in the canoe. My brother luckily didn't. One boy got up and he was just fooling around, rocking the boat, and the whole canoe tipped over. And they all went in, and this was in the fall, so the water was cold, but one boy couldn't swim, and he started to drown. And so Martin's son tried to save him, and as a result lost his own life.
I remember asking him once, you know, Martin, what has kept you going all these years? And he said, I do it for Stanley's memory.
Look at all that science there in that machine. It can save hard work. And when are we going to learn to put that technology to use in restoring the earth instead of ripping it all apart?
When asked what motivated him, what he stood for, Martin replied, I stand for trees.
But I do recall him telling me a story one time when he was a little boy, 4 or 5 years old. He lived in the prairies, and there were no trees there at all. And he had to walk 2 or 3 miles or more, and there was one tree there, and how amazing that was to him. It was just, it opened his heart. He just loved that tree. It was so special to him. So that was maybe his beginnings in wanting to protect beautiful forested areas, you know, not seeing everything as a commercial product, but as something that was valuable in its own.
He loved the trees and thought that the trees were worth a lot more standing than down, that they're the lungs of our world and they should be appreciated and taken care of.
He owned properties around town, and he wouldn't allow the trees to be cut down on them. That was just another aspect of the way he looked at things.
It's a little too crooked for saw log, and too small, of course, but it's doing its own thing, and it looks to be happy doing it, and I'm happy to let it do that very thing.
If you have invested in standing trees or green space somewhere, whether large or small, that space should be earning credits as a carbon sink. If not today, I think in the very near future it will. Not only that, but if you can maintain a canopy of trees, you have the potential of medicinal herbs that grow under the trees. And you can have floral greens that grow under the trees. And you could do some beekeeping. And and you could do some tourism if you have a walk in the forest. And also that you have allowed space for the wildlife. And I think it's just a matter of recognizing the possibility and then fly at it. And don't argue about it, just do it, and you'll find the speculators coming on board.
He deplored loggers were light on the face of the earth. He left me alone. But he used to voice his opinion.
He put a lot of time and effort into trying to make people understand what is your place in this forest that's around us. What are people in this community and outside this community trying to do to these forests and to these waters?
How do we get enough people recognizing the value of forest that feeling which words cannot describe really, but that sensation of being in touch, so closely in touch with Mother Nature that words cannot describe it, but you're there in the forest and you walk through and you feel a tremendous lift. Things are not so bad after all. In Saskatchewan, I witnessed the drought, the destruction of the climate there by plowing up all the land, destroying the vegetation that stopped the soil from drifting, and draining the sloughs and the swamps so that there's no more water there for the birds. And I saw all that happen, and with the terrible dust storms that I experienced, even by 1931 there were terrible dust storms there.
I think he was among the earliest people to make us ecologically aware. He saw the implications of what was happening in the world. He had a very good idea of the big picture.
He understood the ecosystems and the way that everything interacted with one another.
He delighted in the envisioning of interconnections amongst the parts of a system.
Martin almost became the conscience of the community in a sense. And the way he was able to do that was that he was so broad in his scope of research and of comprehension that he was able to voice or become the locus of many diverse concerns.
He often single-handedly opposed conditioned acceptance of destructive cultural habits in the community and the province and other places as well.
We still tell people that you vote for us and we'll get you jobs for everybody. At a time when the last thing we need is more production, more drain on the Earth's resources, more advertising and marketing, these are all the things that add to the imbalance of carbon in the atmosphere. Why are we pushing little pockets of industry in one direction, at the same time giving lip service to climate change on the other hand?
When he first came to Powell River in 1948, he worked for the mill for a couple of years. And the waste that he observed it was too much for him. Mind you, he did manage, I believe, to build 2 houses with that waste. And they're still on Fernwood. And all the trees on that land are still there.
His own life was so cluttered and his own properties were such a mess that it was really hard to call him an environmentalist, but he was. But I also understand that he just didn't want to throw things away because there might be a use for them.
He was what I called an environmental philosopher, but he wanted to live it. And he was always looking around for people to be practical about pollution and environmental issues. So he was on the same wavelength as I was to do things practically rather than just talk about it.
He was so before his time, and he was made fun of and laughed at by a lot of the more conventional people.
For at least a year, maybe 2 years or more, Martin wore a brown paper bag on his head.
That was his environmental symbol. That was the way he wanted to let everyone know that recycling and reuse was important. And at that time, that was like almost unheard of.
When we started the recycling movement here in Powell River many years ago, it was against the law. And one of our councillors quickly pointed that out to us, that we have a bylaw on the municipal docket which says no one may store garbage. And garbage was defined as newspapers, cardboards, cans, and bottles.
Powell River wanted to look prosperous, and if you recycled things, well, maybe you weren't prosperous.
The local government visualized that we were harboring filthy stuff, but they didn't know that you could wash your cans like your dishes. It's all clean.
Martin and a band of renegades had a warehouse somewhere where they kept recyclable stuff. They'd have to sneak there.
I remember my husband and we even drove to Vancouver with recyclables that was going on in Vancouver. I can't believe it now.
When I got on the municipal council, we persuaded the council to start a recycling program, one of the first ones in Powell River with government sanction. And he was helping to manage that and operate it. So he was right in there making it happen.
40 years later, it's established. A regular system. It's marvelous, but our early beginnings required a lot of campaigning. The Anti-Pollution Association, it was organized back in 1969 or 1970, way back then. There were signs of pollution from the mill reaching the beach. That's how the interest grew.
We would spend time researching, what the mill's pollution levels were. But Martin, initially, he was derided, so was I. But we just carried on, and eventually people began to realize what he was trying to do. And then, of course, some of the bigger issues occurred. There was the treatment of Powell River sewage. At that time, the big answer was to have a very, very big pipe at Grief Point and send all the sewage out to a famous country called Away. And medical officers of health thought it was fine. It was all going to go away. There were big tidal currents off there, and we didn't have to worry about it after that. We kicked up a fuss, and we got the council to consider secondary treatment of sewage. So he was heavily involved in that.
He supported any activity that he saw that was progressive or good. He was there to support it.
He didn't trust corporations. He got worried about what could happen to Powell River if people started to industrialize it anymore.
1996, there was a group of us, including Martin and several others, that got together and incorporated EcoCare Conservancy. The main idea was to allow people to put their land into a restrictive covenant and protect it from logging or any kind of abuse that would destroy the natural beauty of what was there.
Martin was constantly working towards some benefit for the earth and this community, and it made me see that our responsibility is constant.
He was a peace activist.
He was a builder rather than a complainer, I would say.
He wanted people to get out and say what you want. Tell us what you want. Get involved. Don't stay at home and grumble about things. If you have a problem with something, get out and let's talk about it. Let's change the world.
All of a sudden he said, what happened? I used to be, laughed at. And now people come and talk to me and want to hear what I have to say.
I want life to continue on this planet. I'm not impartial about that. Impending crisis is anticipated by some of us who gloomy types we're called, and we feel that the best answer is self-sufficiency. We build our own reserve of self-help, and our own dignity and prestige will grow with it. We reduce the amount of dependence on this great big mechanical machine that has no heart and appears to have no brain.
I think he thought Powell River was a special spot. We often had conversations of how close we are to being self-sufficient or self-sustainable.
I think Martin saw two very distinct sides to Powell River. The culture of the mill was something that he found very confining. Then there were, sort of the free spirit people who lived here. And those are the people that he was most connected with. Towards the end of his life, when I got to know him, values in general had changed here. I know that if he could see what is going on today in Powell River, that would make Martin a very happy man.
I felt like Martin had a huge amount of faith in what was coming.
I don't know whether it's gaining or not, but at least
we're probably gaining in wisdom and knowledge and experience anyway, and gaining in age as well, so sooner or later we're going to have to turn up our toes and say, sow the ball to the next generation.